group, there's been some discussion on the chat about corridors, and I think that it could be worth talking again. This is another example of what are the variety of things that sort of could get us to half. And I think it's represents a more sophisticated sort of network thinking about what protected areas look like. Walter, would you like to make some comment on corridors?
So, as Ed already alludes to in his book, and as we certainly are all aware, as we think about half-Earth and think about actual solutions towards sustaining biodiversity for future generations, we obviously can't just think about parks. The days where you can just think about setting up a huge swath of land as a new park are mostly over, and they should be over, because we need to think more about engaging local communities, about essentially the larger socioeconomic setting of reserve design, but also of just alternative ways of sustaining species. So management areas for conservation, or the conservation of only particular species. So in some cases, what we're talking about in half-Earth is not necessarily huge new parks or reserves. I think some of those, sustaining some of those great wild places of the world would be wonderful, seeing some more of those. But in many cases, we're talking about what Ed actually called a gerrymandering of reserves, if you will, or places that are seeing species put first and human uses potentially put second, but not excluded. So as we think about conservation solutions, not just in North America, but also in some of the rapidly growing economies in the tropics, and we think about balancing the needs of nations, the needs of people, balancing the sustainable development goals around biodiversity with those around poverty alleviation, education, all of these other important needs. We need to think about smaller places. We need to think about best possible science and technology helping us identify those places and manage them, and thereby sustain those vital nodes in the web going forward. And that includes, sorry, that was a bit of a longer introduction, but I see those things ultimately intertwined. That includes these corridors, which are sometimes large, but often they're quite small, and they're about ensuring the connectivity of populations of species. And that applies to both plants and animals ultimately. So as we humans necessarily will be using a greater portion of the planet going forward, we can do so in an increasingly smart way. And that's where the Half-Earth Project map and a lot of other activities around the world are trying to put their best thinking and science in how can we identify those places, and think not just about a place here and a place there, but think about the larger interconnected web, if you will, of places that will help us support species and important functions going forward. And